After the chaotic summer in Europe, what were the lessons learned in terms of optimizing the operations, but also on the other hand, the aviation safety? Was that a concern? Because we saw what happened. There was a traffic chaos, both in the air and on the ground.
There was no direct concern on safety during the summer, because all professionals did their work with a high level of competence and professionalism. There was the illustration of what happened during the summer is that we have a complex supply chain, and in fact, you can have a very well-functioning airline which may end up in difficulties because of air traffic control or because of airport operations. So everything is linked, actually, and that's the big lessons learned from last summer.
At the same time, as you mentioned during the panel, we're still using kind of really obsolete and legacy technologies in terms of aviation management, communication in particular. And we're living in the 21st century where digitalization is taking over. We're now speaking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. Where are we at in terms of innovation and implementation into the whole process? Because EASA is the regulator that can regulate everything.
So for air traffic management, for instance, we are still using technologies for the discussions or sharing of instructions between air traffic controllers on the ground and pilots in the air using VHF radio, which is a technology dating from the 1940s. And this cannot continue. As you mentioned, in the new digital world, we have to do something about it. And we absolutely need, it's become an urgency to digitalize the communications between the ground and the aircraft. The difficulty is that if you choose a technology, it has to be a choice which is a global choice. It doesn't make sense to make a choice for Europe, which is not the same as the choice for the US or for Asia or for Africa. So we need to make a global choice, which makes things much more complicated. That's the first thing. The second point is that what the business case of it. Who's going to pay for this change? Is it the airlines only? Is it going to be air traffic control service providers? Is it government? How do we find a business model for making this change happen? I'm sure we will find a solution, but it needs to happen soon.
Who is the leader in terms of that change management? Is it Europe and EASA in particular? Is it the FAA in the States? Or do we need a global input on part of ICAO, for example?
So we need everyone to be involved. We have created a group with the FAA to look at potential opportunities in terms of new technologies for digital communication, and we will announce very soon the results of this group, which are at least showing that between the US and Europe we can have an agreement on the way forward, and then put that into the international standardization arena to get a global standard out of it. So US and Europe will lead, I hope, the work on this topic.
Yeah, because we saw a case that is still unresolved, which is the MH case 370, that flight that just disappeared. And then we saw that there is a huge gap in terms of communication in between the ground and the aircraft in certain regions of the world. Although Europe is quite well connected, but some certain parts of Africa, for example, are still not that well developed, and there, as you put it, needs to be a global solution on that.
Creating this digital link will solve a number of issues.
Yeah.
I'm not certain that it will solve everything, but it will solve a number of issues, and I think that's the only way forward for aviation.
Do you rather see a cooperation and incentive on part of the airlines, or rather a resistance towards those changes that are inevitably coming?
So all boils down to who's going to pay for what.
Yeah.
And the airlines, of course, will see that as another additional cost for them, with no direct return on investment, if I may say so. So I think we need to build the business model on who's going to pay, not only for the equipment on board the aircraft, but also for the service itself. It's going to be based on satellite communication, obviously, to allow for seamless communication on oceans and things like this. So who's going to pay for the satellites? Who's going to pay for the communication cost? Who's going to pay for the equipment on board the aircraft and on the ground? We need to go into this kind of details in order to build a solid business case and allowing also for the regulatory authorities to take the proper decisions.
Yeah, and obviously there will be an offset towards the governments as well, but towards the private sector on another hand, because they have the incentive to invest and then sell their products as suppliers.
Indeed, if we can find a win-win solution in which there are parts of the system which can be paid by the government for safety of life, institutional kind of communication needs, and the rest being paid by commercial partners, because there is a business, connecting the passengers in the aircraft is, I think, a valid business. But we need to look at this. We need to make sure as well that there will be no cybersecurity risk at all, which these days is something a bit complicated.
Yeah.
So there are a certain number of topics that we need to address. But more importantly, we need to have the common decision and the common willingness to move forward. And that's what we are trying to achieve by working together with the FAA, Boeing and Airbus.